Hi students, in this video we're going to begin our last topic for this class, which is the study of the Reformation in North America. And so we're bringing together in many ways the two parts of this course. We're looking at the Reformation, but we're also looking at the Reformation in context of the expansion of European influence across the world and European discovery, which I explained earlier in the course is a legacy of the Renaissance, also a legacy of the medieval period, but we've looked at it in association with the Renaissance. England is not the only European country involved in the exploration of North America, but England is very much the major figure in this early history of North America. And England is the major country that's promoting the spread of Protestantism at this time. So a lot of what we're going to talk about today is going to focus on England. English explorers of the New World were a little bit behind the Spanish, but not by much, and they caught up relatively quickly. 1497, Henry VII, the first Tudor king, eager to promote his new dynasty in the same way that Ferdinand and Isabel were promoting the unification of Spain, the legacy of the unification of Spain. Henry VII funded an expedition by yet another Italian explorer, John Cabot, that discovered the coast of Newfoundland. So this was an effort to beat the Spanish and make it to Asia by sailing to the north. So by this point, people still not quite sure whether this is a new continent or not. But John Cabot discovers this land. He sets up English settlements there, but these settlements are not especially successful, except that they promote continued interest in discovering what's known as the Northwest Passage, sailing north and west in order to reach Asia. Not a whole lot of exploration is carried out by the English in the 16th century, at least until the end of the 16th century. The next great discovery in the quest for the Northwest Passage is achieved by Henry Hudson, who discovers Hudson's Bay in 1609. And so Hudson discovered this bay, was deceived into thinking that this was a sea kind of like the Mediterranean. You can imagine entering this giant body of water. The only thing you really have to compare it with is the Mediterranean Sea. He hoped that at the end of this sea he would find Asia. He discovered too late that this was not the case. Too late because the ice had closed in behind the ship for the winter and they were unable to return. So Hudson and his crew spent what must have been a terrifying winter stranded on ice and surrounded by polar bears and battling starvation and the cold. And then when the spring came, Henry Hudson said, well, this is great, let's keep exploring. And the crew said, absolutely no way. And they put Hudson and his son in a ship and cast them adrift. We have no idea what happened to them. They disappear from our knowledge. The crew make it back to England. And by suggesting that they knew something, that something had been found, they're able to evade being court-martialed for deposing their captain until they're able to scatter and avoid prosecution. The English have some significant success. This is often overlooked. The English have some significant success developing a northeast passage. So this is a passage that crosses the Baltic Sea into Russia and eventually into Central Asia. And English explorers are able to actually connect with the Chinese. This had been the goal of the age of exploration all along, was to develop a direct route between, or a direct trading link between Europe and China, and these English explorers have actually achieved that. However, by the time it's achieved, people are recognizing that the real financial gains and financial opportunities are to be had through trade via sea with the Atlantic, or in the Atlantic and with the Americas, rather than with Asia. So crossing over land is just so much slower, you can carry so much less cargo, and so people are recognizing that the opportunities lie in the West. And so the English start to take the New World more seriously, start to become more aggressive in attempting to exert their influence in the New World during the reign of Elizabeth I. Part of this was because of the political rivalry between England and Spain during this period. So the England and Spain are allies under Henry VII, for the first part of Henry VIII's reign, and during Mary Tudor's reign. The English wouldn't have upset the Spanish by interfering with the New World. But now you have Elizabeth and England, and it's the leading Protestant power in Europe, and you have Philip and the Spanish, and they're the leading Catholic power. The leading source of Spanish wealth is coming from the New World, and so the English start to try and undermine that source of Spanish wealth and power. Now, the Spanish, as I explained earlier in the course, had managed their colonies through an economic model known as protectionism. And that's the use of, or the restriction of colonies to only trading with the mother country. So Spanish colonies in the New World could only buy and sell from Spain to the advantage of the Spanish and the disadvantage of the colonies. And so the English start to undermine that by showing up. They start to undermine it by a couple of ways. First, they show up and sort of everyone's kind of nodding and winking at each other here, but they pretend to be Spanish ships. Spanish colonies do business with them at a much better rate for them, and then they can kind of shrug their shoulders when the Spanish come up and say, "Well, we didn't know that they weren't Spanish. We thought they were Spanish because they wore a Spanish flag." And so this is one way that the English start to undermine the Spanish economy of the New World. They also undermine the Spanish economy simply by attacking and sinking Spanish ships. And this was done through a system of privateers. One of the leading exponents of the privateers was a man named John Hawkins. And John Hawkins is considered the father of English seafaring prowess. That England is the major naval power in Europe and in the world from about 1600 to 1940, 1950 can be traced back to him, at least in the modern world. In 1568, he had led a fleet to Africa to buy a large quantity of slaves from the African coast. Then the fleet journeyed to Spanish colonies in Central America, sold these slaves to Spanish colonies for a huge profit. They then began to explore Florida, but were found by a Spanish fleet that was out to get them, and the fleet was trapped and was totally destroyed. One of the men who escapes is a man named Francis Drake. And this voyage with John Hawkins was Drake's first expedition. The Spanish must have wished that they'd captured him rather than basically anyone else in the English fleet. And he starts to raid Spanish territory very effectively between 1570 and 1573. In 1579, Drake circumnavigates the globe. He becomes the first Englishman to travel around the world. And this is significant because it marks, in the same way that Magellan's voyage around the world marked the rise of European influence across the globe, Drake's voyage is doing the same thing. Drake's voyage is the beginning of the passing of the torch of the leading exponent of European exploration from the Spanish to the English. And then that torch is fully passed 9 years later when Francis Drake leads the English fleet to defeat the Spanish Armada and ensure the continuation of English independence. Now, I said we would focus on English, but it's important also to point out that during this period, the French were exploring North America as well. This exploration begins during the reign of Francis I. Francis I is another monarch who's maybe not officially the first ruler of a new dynasty, but he's the first ruler to try and rebuild France after the 100 Years' War. And so in 1523, Francis is going to give yet another Italian explorer, Giovanni Verrazzano, a commission to explore the North American Atlantic coast. And Verrazzano fails to find the Northwest Passage, which was what Francis I had hoped, but he maps out the coast of North America all the way as far south as the Carolinas. He discovers a natural harbor, a very advantageous natural harbor that will become the site of New York City. French exploration after this will stall until 1598 when Henry IV, who is another king who's trying to promote himself, who's kind of coming to the French monarchy in a position of insecurity. People are skeptical about whether he's really a Catholic monarch. He encourages the exploration of Nova Scotia. And you kind of wonder why this was the area that the French chose. And just to give you a sense of well, we're told that the Spanish were worried about French rivalry and French exploration of the New World. And we're told they were worried about this, but then when they heard that the French were exploring the St. Lawrence River, the Spanish kind of were pretty satisfied and said, well, if they want to explore all the way up there, that's just fine with us. And just to give you an idea of sort of the different approaches, in Spain you have people who are trying to clamber on boats and go to the New World and make their fortune and really risking everything. Whereas in France, they're basically going through the jails and offering people that they can end their jail sentence if they'll go and try and found this French colony of Nova Scotia. And so one is the equivalent of making a fortune, or seen as the equivalent of making a fortune, the other is seen as the equivalent of a jail sentence. The Nova Scotia colony is a disaster. There are very few survivors that the French rescue a year later. And so French exploration has been unsuccessful until a man named Samuel Champlain establishes the first successful settlement on the modern day site of Quebec in 1608. And so Quebec is the strong point that controls the entry to the St. Lawrence River and trade that's going to come through the St. Lawrence River and connect the settlement with the Great Lakes. And Champlain's significance is in successfully establishing the first French settlement in the New World. From about 1615 onwards, we find accounts of Franciscan missionaries who came with the support of the French government to try and preach the Christian gospel to the Native American peoples in Canada. We don't know that they were particularly successful in gaining many converts, but we have some tremendous stories of these barefooted friars who were trying to live in the same way that the Native American tribes were. They spend all day sitting cross-legged in a canoe. They ran with the tribes. They knew that if they fell behind, they would die of getting attacked by bears or cold or exposure or hunger. And we know that they won at least the respect of the Native Americans just by being tough. They are replaced around 1625 by the first French Jesuit missionaries to Canada. We know less about the Jesuits having exploits like the Franciscans and living with the Native American tribes, but we do know that they were more successful in terms of converting Native American peoples to Christianity. And this is part of the legacy of the Counter-Reformation and the Renaissance again, that the Jesuits are a Counter-Reformation movement. They have this Renaissance skill with languages that enables them to communicate better with the Native Americans. And so this is a part of the Counter-Reformation that's not a direct response to Protestantism, but is linked to the Renaissance as well. I'll talk more about the English settlements in the next video.